that we have been using. And it's called Why Introspection Matters. It's on YouTube. And it's just a lovely story. And we're using it for all 4 webinars, which is something new, of, I think his name is Ecclesias and the lion. And the idea that the lion has a thorn in its paw and does not know what to do about it. So he's terrorizing the villagers, he's roaring, he's angry, he's frightening people. And this young shepherd sees this anger, and instead of responding with fear, is able to respond with compassion because he sees what the problem is. And the problem is the thorn in the paw. And there's just so many ways that can be interpreted as when there's something wrong with us that we don't see, that we may act out in a variety of emotional and inappropriate ways when really the problem is something within us, instead of projecting it and thinking that it's somebody or something else. So today, we're actually going to look a little bit more from the standpoint of being this young boy looking at somebody else in pain. And the technique is called active listening. It is not just something to be used when someone else is hurting, but it's really a way of being to be present. It's not talked about as an awareness practice, but basically that is what it ends up being, to really be someplace and to be fully listening to another person. And what a tremendous gift that is. It's not something that we often do. So Peggy, if you would go ahead and put up the first slide.
Okay, give me a moment.
The idea of active listening is used in the real world, not just as a spiritual practice, in a lot of ways. When I first heard about it, it was because I was volunteering for a suicide prevention line. I then later worked with battered women. And the idea of active listening is that often people who are really suffering don't have someone who's really listening to them. And just the act of listening, we don't have to come up with solutions, we don't have to fix it, but to be able just to really listen open-heartedly can go a long way.
Is it showing up there?
I don't see it.
Okay, it should be popping up now.
I see it real small.
Real small, okay.
Now I see you again.
Wonder why that's not expanding.
Peggy, try opening the screen first on your computer and then share it.
Okay. Let me back out of that.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. Yeah. We're all still kind of learning these techniques. My iPad, I can't even share my screen. So Peggy volunteered to do it for me.
And I've been practicing this and it worked well.
Of course.
Okay, it is up.
Okay, and it's a full screen.
And go to full screen.
Yeah, go ahead and try it. If it doesn't work this time, we can just continue without it. But if you've got it so it'll work, then we'll try it.
Okay. Okay, it should be on full screen now.
Okay, then go ahead and share your screen.
Share. Wonder why it's not. It's up.
And now it's not letting you share?
Are you,
No, I don't see it on the screen at all. I mean, it's in front of me.
but is it on the monitor? Here we go. There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, that's not quite full screen, but at least you can, actually, it doesn't even have the picture. Okay, that doesn't matter. Anyway, I think it's lovely in some ways, everything in life has purpose. So for us to be sitting there, and I just felt like supporting Peggy as she was working out how to do this, and then to be patient about it and to let her figure it out. I think that is just a beautiful example of what we're talking about. That, there are times that when things don't work, people get impatient and angry, and Peggy seemed very just focused on what she was doing and getting the job done. So I think that is kind of lovely for us to be there and witness that when somebody's having a difficulty, that we don't have to all jump in with suggestions, and we don't, can get to be overwhelming when everybody's talking. And that Ananya, who has more experience with this, was able to help her with it. So I think that's kind of a lovely little introduction to what we're talking about today. So just starting with the idea, we think of acts of compassion as giving blankets to those who are cold, feeding the hungry, helping animals and rescuing them, but actually just being present and actively listening is an act of compassion. That our presence really does mean something. So we can go on to, well, actually there's more on the bottom of that isn't showing up, so I'm just going to read it. Active listening is being fully present to listen. Don't think about what you will say next or judge what is said. So actually, I think we could have a little bit of a discussion about that. You can leave that up, Peggy, and play with, oh, nice. But how about the idea of being fully present to listen and not thinking about what you will say next or judge what is said? Any thoughts about that idea?
I always think the element of empathy is also important.
That's great. You're already on the next one. Thank you. Very well said.
But I think that when you're doing active listening, it's sort of like you're allowing yourself to sort of be that empty vessel or that sounding board that doesn't that's not responding constantly. You're sort of just really intent on what the person is saying and really at full attention for them.
Absolutely. And do you think that's something that people do in general, or you personally, or just people in general? Not, you don't have to answer, Ananya. Someone else can comment.
Well, I think it's kind of mirroring is a quality too.
That's a good point. Yes.
It's a little bit different than active listening. I think the mirroring, well, it is one of the techniques. Yes, I'll agree with that. One of the techniques of letting someone know that you're really listening. Absolutely.
But I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that because I think people can sometimes mirror each other. And I know what you're talking about, Frank, because we use it in therapy. But I think sometimes we can go through the act of mirroring, but not really listen.
Well, that's why I said empathy first.
Yeah.
Empathy, I think, is critical. I think that presence and then empathy is first. Then maybe later you might want to mirror, but
Right.
I think there's these multiple qualities, these elemental foundational qualities that I think we're talking about here, that you have to have. And people look for that, as you're establishing that rapport and engagement, there's always, a feeling, because it depends how long, the time goes when you're sitting there being present with somebody. They kind of gauge you, they kind of know. And if you if you kind of veer away your attention, it's funny what happens when you start looking away or looking down or looking at paper or writing notes or whatever. It changes that engagement, people. So that's why I'm saying these various qualities
Right.
of active
Right.
listening.
Yeah. So really, but first of all, we're really just focusing on this idea of being fully present, and not to think about what you'll say next or judge what is said. And so coming from that place, to me, is a discipline. It's not something that necessarily comes naturally. And certainly in a group of people, when you have a lot of people talking, often you are thinking about what you're going to say next and how do you fit it in and keeping with the flow of conversation. So it's a little bit different than, say, what you would do at a cocktail party. Not that we go to those.
Actually,
I never would put.
I've had this experience in very unusual spots, like in an airplane that's running an hour late or something, or you're caught in a storm, and all of a sudden, two people, you just start talking to somebody, and they talk with you, and you can see the anxiety, and people want to talk to each other. Before that, you were engaged with your headphones or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, it's really strange. Or like on a L train, or in the waiting room of the airport. I found that really people started getting just the authentic human experience starts happening.
Well said. It doesn't have to be something planned,
Yeah,
something
it's
that is
yeah,
arranged. It can be a way of being.
yeah, exactly. It's like just that quality.
This is going to carry an unfair amount.
Oh, that wasn't someone talking. That sounded like a recording. Does someone else want to share? Thank you so much, Frank. There's
You're
someone
welcome.
else.
I've just got a few thoughts. This is David from Australia. I think it's important that we don't have any distractions when we're trying to listen to people. We need to make sure that we're totally focused and we have our mobile phones turned off and we don't have interruptions from other people. So you really have to be have your peripheral environment controlled before you can actively listen to somebody else.
And some of it really, go ahead.
Yeah, go, Catherine. Go, Catherine.
No, it was me. Go ahead, Diana.
Oh, sorry, Carol. I several months ago, I joined a local walking group, and I quickly realized that almost all the people that come to it can hardly wait to start talking and just can hardly bear to stop. And at some point, at some point, I gave up trying to have a sustained conversation, and so now I'm using that walk as an exercise in what Carol has just referred to as discipline. And before I arrive, I say to myself, right, you're going to go into listening mood. Give up that constant desire to start running the discussion and just, get into it and dominate. And I'm consciously, it's very good because I'm doing it once or twice or 3 times a week. And it's not just a one-off effort. I'm having to keep coming back and disciplining myself, and it's quite an interesting, worthwhile experience. Sometimes I break out and go berserk and start telling people to shut up and listen. But basically, it's an opportunity that is being represented to me regularly, and it's jolly good.
Thank you. That's great. And it doesn't sound like you came with that intention, but that's just kind of what happened. So that's great to use something as an opportunity like that.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Hi, it's Deborah. I just had a question. I'm sorry. Well, what is mirroring over?
Ananya, do you want to describe that from your background?
So
You probably know.
mirroring actually is something that, I mean, I've learned mirroring from being a counselor, a mental health counselor. It's sort of where you come to the level of your client. You know, you sit in an open position so that your client knows that you're receptive to what they're saying, but then also you try to use, not necessarily always, because you have some clients who use swear words as their language, but you try to mirror their style of communication, their way of sitting, their way of just their way of being, so that they understand that you're really listening to what they're saying and they feel comfortable with you. And when you use it in a social setting, you can notice that we mirror whether we are aware of it or not. We will often, if somebody is sitting with their, and I've watched women do this. So women will often sit like this and talk to each other. They sort of relax. They put their hand, you know, their head in their hand and so forth. And you'll find that women will do this with each other. If we sit in a certain way, if somebody crosses their legs, the other person will end up crossing their legs. It's just something that's in us, because if we're really listening to another person, we end up mirroring their behavior whether we know it or not, their body language. So does that give you a better idea?
It does, and being with you guys, I'll really have to watch what I'm starting to do. No, I mean that in a good way, because you guys all know this so well. I feel like I'm with the giants over.
Well,
Well, it's
I don't know that we.
I'm
another
sorry.
perspective. The reason I brought it up, it's another perspective on validation.
That's true.
Mirroring gives the person a sense that you really heard them. Like when you nod when somebody's speaking, yeah, you get the sense. But when you really say back what the person, as well as when you, like you were talking about mirroring behavior, like if you actually mirror their body language. But if you actually say back to somebody what they've said in some paraphrased version, they really know that you listened now, don't you?
True.
And that's when they really feel validated. When somebody actually says back, then they really know that you are listening.
Yeah.
And just a lot of people that don't really get listened to and feel validated, that is a major feeling of, yes, this person really understands me.
Yeah,
So,
especially
Can I say
oh, go
can I
ahead.
say something about that? When you hear the offering of phone lines for suicidal people, you're not watching them, you're not mirroring them, but they're very effective. So I don't agree with mirroring being necessary and important factor, because those hotlines when people are on suicidal watch are effective without mirroring. Mirroring.
No, we do mirror in the conversation. It's just what Frank was talking about, the whole paraphrasing, that's a form of mirroring. That you use the words that the person has said to you, even if it's not comfortable for you. Because I get people on the suicide hotline who will swear, and I generally don't use profanity, but I will use the words that they use and say, okay, tell me what you mean by this. Talk to me a little bit about what this means to you. And that's mirroring, where you're willing to paraphrase what they're saying, sometimes using the same conversations, the same words that they're using. That's mirroring.
And I think as we're practicing active listening ourselves and in our lives, that we'll find what works for us. And it may be for some people, consciously mirroring is really effective technique. And it may be for some people, it happens naturally and that they're not necessarily planning it or thinking it. So I'm not trying to say, I don't think anyone is, that there's one right way as an individual for us to do this. The main thing in the first point, just really being present and not thinking about what comes next, but really being there and really listening to somebody. And there are lots of different ways that that can end up manifesting. So the baseline really is that first piece of just being present. Everyone good? Anyone, any other things? We've got a few more things to talk about too, but this is good. Thank you, everybody. So Peggy, can you go ahead. Can you put up the next
I was
slide?
just
Go ahead.
thinking about mirroring. It wouldn't work. I don't think it would work if two people were trying to mirror each other. One person has to be conscious of doing that and the other person unconscious that it's being done. Correct?
Right. So you wouldn't, if somebody came to you in distress, we're talking about the suicide hotline, but even a friend comes to lunch and she's clearly frazzled. So,
right.
you may want to be more active listening than just chit-chatting. And, you
right.
know, there are times to use different techniques. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead and go to the next one. There we go. So that
right there?
Yes, the list. Yeah, because we just talked about the first one, being fully present to listen. Don't think about what you will say next or judge what is said. So that's the other thing. When we're really hearing somebody, we're not evaluating what they're saying, except maybe in terms of empathy, which, like I said, Frank already mentioned, is the second point here. Show empathy and acknowledge feelings. Besides hearing what is said, look at the whole message, including body language. So if you're with someone face to face, and we all know that thing when you ask somebody and you say, how are you? And they're like, I'm fine. You're like, okay, they're angry. Or they're kind of, I'm fine, and they're hiding. Or so interpreting and really being willing to allow somebody not to be okay.
Yeah.
That's not something everyone is comfortable with. Some people don't like to go to hospitals. They make them uncomfortable. Some people aren't good being around people who are emotional. So if it's a skill that you have out there in the world, it can be really useful. Just that conversation in the airport, and of course with our friends and family. So look at the whole message, ask for clarification and detail while withholding your own judgment and opinions. So perhaps you use the technique of mirroring as far as paraphrasing. One of the great things about that is if you paraphrase what you think you've heard, you're not always right. And that's actually okay, because then you can get clarification on what it is the person's feeling and thinking. And then at that point, there may be some feedback you want to give, but it would not be something like you should do this. It would be more perhaps helping the person to clarify how they're feeling or thinking even more, to help them to have some insights into what is driving them to this being upset, kind of finding the thorn, if we're using the metaphor of the video that we had. So any thoughts or more comments on the rest of this particular slide? Yeah, I was still going to see if someone wanted to talk. Have you had some experience where you've been really listening to somebody, and perhaps as you're asking for clarification, has it helped them get clarity? I mean, that's kind of been my experience, that someone will come and they're upset because someone did something, and then as you ask questions, maybe the person didn't say good morning to your friend because she was so wrapped up in her own stuff that she just wasn't even able to think about somebody else.
Are you trying to tell me something, Carol?
Not at all. Go ahead, someone else.
It may sound a little silly, but I don't believe, well, I'll use my husband as an example. I don't believe he ever actively listens to me. And I'm not saying that to be funny. And I think that's a point of contention in our marriage. We've been married 52 years, and
Wow.
you want some sort of validation. You want to know that people, particularly significant people in your lives, can actively listen to you when you're trying to be serious about something, or if you're feeling hurtful, in pain or sad. And it's very difficult to elicit something like that without preaching or trying to figure out, well, actually getting angry at the individual and saying, you're not listening to me. It's important that you listen to me. And even that goes over my husband's head, way over. But I feel the need for to actively listen to people. I know what it's like when people don't listen to you and you need for them to listen.
And I think you said, maybe mirroring wouldn't work if everyone's mirroring everyone. It sounds like a comedy sketch. But the active listening can certainly be something that two or more people can do to have that intent, that respect to both, to have both people really doing that. That's a true conversation.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So
I think
being able to model that can help.
I think we all need to have an active listener in our lives, even if it's outside the family. I think my daughter, who's now 35, but when she was a teenager, she had a very strong friend who was just a friend of the family who she confided into and was her sort of soulmate. So I don't think we all need somebody like that. I think we have to seek somebody out in our lives like that, an active listener.
I've sometimes thought that if we all had someone like that in our lives, that we wouldn't need, of course, counselors are trained and have other skills, but having one person really listen goes a long way.
Does.
And that's why I say it's an act of compassion.
Peggy,
Agreed.
Peggy, do you have someone, a friend or a family member who gives you quality active listening time?
No, and I don't feel that I really need that outside of my relationship. I think a spousal relationship is fairly intense, more intense than any other type of relationship generally, unless it's parent to child. And I don't get as frustrated with other people as I do with my husband. And I'm sure the same is true with him. But the answer to that question is no. I really don't feel I need it except in certain situations in my personal life.
Well, then this might sound a little bit pessimistic, but I would, at a deeper level, I think it's optimistic. I think that you may never get that active listening from your husband, but that frustration in you will make you so much more, is making you so much more sensitive to others in need of deeper listening. And that's the ultimate thing on the spiritual path, is learning to tune in more to others. So while it's a great loss and hurt to you personally that your husband is unable to give you quality listening, it's clearly making you a better listener for others, don't you think?
I really do, and that's an excellent point. If you're aware of your own emotions, your own feelings about things, you can recognize those things, I think, better in other people. In that respect, you're so right.
So you already have the next slide up, which I think this kind of segues into, have you experienced someone actively listening to you? And how does it feel to know you've had someone's full attention? We'll talk about it from the other side later, but this first one is, how does it feel personally to really know you've been heard?
Fabulous, fabulous.
I'm wondering about something. What do you
Yes.
think about the idea of compassionate listening compared to active listening?
Aren't they the same?
Yeah, I think it's just what's a matter of terms.
Well, I'm
Do
just
you see a
wondering when
difference?
people hear that, what do they, because I think the word compassionate listening has a different element that people feel like, oh, yeah, as opposed to active listening is kind of almost transactional.
Mm. Well,
Well,
it's been the term and the techniques have been around for a long time, and it's used in businesses and counseling and things. So it may be that it's called active listening for that particular market, as it were. But I think compassionate listening, captures it for sure.
Yeah.
Is someone else going to say something? Sorry.
Frank, do you
I
think
was
there's a
wondering
difference?
what the difference would be.
Yeah. Do you?
There's an element of heart in compassion, and not necessarily so in active listening.
That's what I was focusing on. Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. In my transactions with people in like a setting when I've done a critical incident debriefing, like say in a company, I would use the word compassionate listening to help them understand we're going to be more heart focused, as opposed to if you're going to do active listening with a group that's working on a task. I find a big difference. So that's why I was bringing
Right.
that in. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Right. And then, so what has someone had an experience that we can call it active? I think compassionate's a good word too. Has someone had that experience? I've heard it felt great, but anything come to mind more specifically about how that feels? And how do you know that someone's listening?
Absolutely. It hit me like a ton of bricks the first time I experienced total undivided attention. I was about 22 or 3, and I was at ADIA, and Surendra Narayan, who was RADA's vice president, was in his office, and I had some message to take to him from my father in New Zealand. And he turned his chair around, and I sat down, and I just was confronted with this total still, calm, listening attention. I don't know if he was like that all the time, but with me, he was like, and I felt it immediately. And the result was that I was immediately very focused myself and very careful of my wording, because I knew that every word counted to him. I don't know how I felt that immediately, but I did. And it was an amazing dialogue, because I stopped my nervous jabbering and carrying on and just became focused and centered and quiet and very careful in my wording. It was a wonderful experience.
Mm-hmm. So you actually felt it physically calming and not careful in your wording. Like, were you nervous to say the wrong thing, or you mean
No.
more
Just I was more attentive, focused. I
attentive?
was able to focus on my wording and communicating exactly what I wanted to say, rather than gibbering and jabbering and carrying on nervously. It was just a wonderful experience. Wonderful.
Thank you. That's well said. Anyone else?
I think with compassionate listening, you're able to get behind the surface, so to speak. That's what I'm getting from Diana, that it's deeper than surface listening. Paying attention to the words is different from paying attention to the emotions that are behind the words. If I'm making that clear. Compassionate listening, there's an element of feeling involved. And I don't see that so much in active listening, but definitely in compassionate listening. They're tuning in at a different level. And I have seen that. When I've seen that with my years ago before my mother passed away, she was able to do that, to get behind the words and feel the emotion that was back there and bring that out. And we had some in-depth conversations back then because of her skill in doing that. And it was wonderful.
Very nice. And I have to say, I don't know that when I said active listening, I do understand technically it can be different than compassionate listening. But if you'll go to the next slide, we talk about it, it comes right back to compassion. So just focusing on the part on the left, and it's actually a poem. We need to listen fully. It is the basis of all compassionate action. We need to listen not only to the voice of the person who is hurting, but to her bare feet, the baby wrapped in her shawl, and the stars in the cold night. Such full listening helps us hear who is calling and what we can do in response. When we listen for the truth of the moment, we know better what to do and what not to do, when to act and when not to act. We are all here together, and we're all we've got. From Mirabai Bush. So that seems to be a lot of the beautiful points that the group has been making also.
Could I suggest maybe that women and men have a different approach to this? I think women are more able to listen compassionately, whereas men are better at the active listening. So we probably need to cross both sides of our brain more than we do.
David, I disagree. That's a stereotyping.
I would take issue with that. I started out as an active listener, but as a family interventionist of 25 years, I've merged both. I started out more active listening, and now when I do an intervention, I really have to be a compassionate listener to be effective. So I've merged both fields.
Well, that's interesting. It's obviously an acquired skill that we can all develop.
Yeah, we have to merge them to be effective because we're both human, and so it really comes to the human, not male or female. It just becomes a human quality.
But I think acknowledging that it can be a learned skill. Some people may have it naturally, but that everyone is capable of doing this. It takes a little discipline, as does self-introspection, as does even something like self-love that we were talking about last time. Not everyone comes in having that when they first start look at their faults. So that's the theosophical, spiritual, whatever word you want to put on it, the path, that there are some very practical, and that's why this is called the Art of Living series. We can certainly study and meditate, but this part of really the art of living, the art of skillfully living, being kind to ourselves, listening to ourselves, as well as to other people.
Yeah, but it's not gender related.
Well, it's a lot to do with gender conditioning. Men have been conditioned to be mostly in their head. That's one of the drawbacks of gender conditioning for men, but men are having to now get with it, and start being more open to the other side of their nature. And that's kind of why men have to grow up to that element, open up to that quality. That's all.
And Ananya, the first webinar of this was about our conditioning, right? Just gender and certainly so many other ways.
Yeah.
But that we really are conditioned in a lot of ways. So it's actually sad to think that men in general may feel that this isn't something they'd be good at, because I think it's something that everyone can be good at if they really come with the idea of being of service and you're not doing it to prove that you're good, but really to practice it and see the value in it.
And that you have it in you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We all have it. It's just we have to develop it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's Lily, right? Thank you.
I was going to say that I think one of the differences that happens with the conditioning is that men are conditioned to feel that they need to solve the problem. And
Exactly.
compassionate listening is about just listening to the problem. It's not about solving it. It's just listening,
Exactly.
you know, and a lot of times, if a, you know, if a man, and it is starting to change. In fact, a lot of women, you know, who have male friends who listen, you know, say that, oh, this is my best male girlfriend, because this guy can really listen to me like my girlfriends listen to me. You know, he's my boy girlfriend or something like that, my boyfriend girlfriend or something. But, you know, it's now becoming much more acceptable for men to just listen and not have to solve the problem.
I've actually seen the other opposite. Women that are corporatized have this problem-solving specific.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then sometimes they come home and they won't listen to their husbands talk about feelings.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is. It's funny because the women have taken on that patriarchal pattern of,
Exactly.
you know, I got to be the problem solver.
Exactly. And
Instead
they're
of
real good
really,
at it.
yeah.
And then they're not open to feelings. And there's somebody, you could be a man or a woman, and they have to get out of that problem solver mode as you're speaking of.
Right.
And then they have to kind of,
Yeah.
okay, can you just hear me out before you try to solve my problem? So
Right.
it's funny how that happens. Either gender can get into that, stuck in that mode.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think even individuals who are sometimes active listening can sometimes be problem solving, can sometimes be tuned out. You know, that it's not really that we have one mode as an individual either.
Exactly. Exactly.
So for us to decide and have conversations like this where we even bring it up, that it's something that we, and maybe not everyone in the group may think it has value, but it seems that we think that this does have value, and we know what it's like, what it feels like to be heard, you know, from the couple of stories. And so do we want to offer that to other people? You know, of course we do. And the more that we're able to live in that awareness and presence, the lack of conditioning, and being open and listening, it seems to me that you then are kind of attracting people of the same depth and ability. And so the conversations that we have can be really juicy and meaningful. Not all the time, but you know that there's a place for that where you really feel like you're being heard and you're hearing the other person, and more happens than just the words, for sure. Okay, anything else? Time goes so quickly. The screen is to the side somehow, Peggy. I'm just getting, it's like I've got the middle of two slides right now on the screen, and I would like you to go to the Stephen Covey quote.
Yes,
That's
I'm
what I
there.
see.
Yeah.
Can you get, I can only see part of it.
I can
I
see
get the
all
whole
of it.
It's up, Carol.
I get the
Okay,
whole
well, if everyone else can see it, that's good. I can just see the left. So most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And that can come across as trying to problem solve, but it also, I was on a trip recently, there was a group of 12 of us, and this one woman listened very carefully. When you were talking, you would feel like you really had her attention, but she would immediately come in with a story that topped yours. You know, bad or good, didn't matter. And it was a bird watching trip. The story often ended with, and I was the only one who saw the bird. So there's can be really actively listening, but if you have that intent to reply. So at first, when she would really listen to people, I admired it. But as time went on and I saw this pattern, I realized that it was like listening, but her brain was figuring out, how do I have a similar story? And there may be times that telling a similar story is helpful, but to really not have that intent to reply necessarily, to not be planning what you're going to say, even if what you're planning is kind and compassionate. I think, imagine, and I know people in this group have had the experience where you say something. I mean, it's happened to me. I've said something, and after I've said it, I've gone, whoa, that was profound. I didn't know I knew that. And I'm not saying that to brag it, because I know other people have said the same thing in this group, that when we're really of compassion, that things come out of your mouth that are wise. So I would go to the next slide because I want to.
Carol, we're losing your sound.
Sorry, I got my hand in the wrong place. I have to train myself. So, and whatever comes to mind is fine. But the next one, when have you fully listening?
I can't hear Carol properly.
Oh. When have you experienced fully listening to someone without the intent to reply? And how did that feel? Oh, I just fixed my screen. Sorry. So, does anyone have an experience where they maybe unconsciously even were just in that place of really being open to someone and listening fully? And how does it feel to be on the receiving end?
I think we're doing it now, listening to you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm in the medical field, and part of our training is to be good listeners, and that's really have to hold yourself. And this discussion is really very relevant to what goes on in my medical practice all the time. I mean, some doctors are good listeners, and others are shocking listeners, as we all know. But yeah, I think being a teacher as well, I think that would be where you actually trained in your work to be a good listener, hopefully.
Mm. Yeah, and it's a little different because being a good listener as a doctor is looking for a result or a diagnosis, of course. And there's a point for that too. I'm certainly not trying to say that something is good or bad, but just to have the awareness that there are times that just listening really is what someone needs. They don't need a diagnosis, or, as we were saying before, that they're not looking for a solution. It's just having a chance to get it out, because they say a trouble shared is cut in half. So just to be able to be somebody that people can really feel like they've been heard.
It certainly takes an effort to stop yourself interrupting somebody. It's really some people can't resist that temptation. I mean, we're all fairly competitive as human beings, aren't we? We're always trying to come up with something in conversation to, show we're better than the other person we're talking to. But one has to really train oneself to control one's urges to interrupt and be a good listener.
I believe part of that is perhaps feeling a little uncomfortable with silence.
Yeah, I was just
that follows something like that. And we want to fill in that blank space. And so we lose a little bit of that connection when we don't acknowledge that silence is fine.
Yes, silence can be very frightening for a lot of people. Mm.
I also have seen people interrupting because they think ahead, and the other person is a slow speaker, so they can know what is the end of the sentence. That's what they told me. I don't know is that right, but it's not with the intention of being in competition. It's just because the speaker is slower and they can grasp, the whole issue before they complete the sentence. So I don't know.
I do that, and my sister calls me out on it, and it bothers her. It really bothers her. She will say to me, yes, that, like the first time it happened, I was like, well, isn't that what you were going to say? And it was, but it's not about a goal or a conclusion. It's really about being present and listening. And I don't even think she's a slow thinker. I just think faster than people talk. So it really is. And there are times that it's just fun, and there's a group and everyone's laughing and you're talking over each other, and that's just fun. And that's what you're doing. But there are certainly times that coming from this place of being slower and centered and knowing that it's something that bothers my sister, I really, around her, want to give her that respect.
Good point.
I notice many times when I'm not talking, because people are used to me commenting a lot, but when I notice when I'm really not talking and I'm really quiet and open, people really feel connected, and I feel really connected to them. And that to me is like a holy experience. I really love that experience when I'm connected with people and they can really tell you're really there for them. And that only usually comes when you're really quiet and kind of absorbed and present. And I love those moments. I really,
And
those
I love
moments, yeah.
just the idea that it's a holy experience, that there really is something, even if it's techniques at first and a little bit of discipline, that there comes a time where it's natural and it has its own wonderful feedback that you want to feel that way. You want to have that kind of interconnection, maybe a little taste of what it is, the idea of the oneness, getting beyond duality, even though you're talking to another person, feeling that universal.
That's it.
So we just have a couple minutes. I was going to see, I don't know, Catherine, I don't think we've heard from you. Do you have anything you might like to say? Or anybody that hasn't had a chance to share? That can be about this question or about something else. It's nice to be able to have a comfortable silence, right? We always hear about the uncomfortable silence. So it's basically time to finish. So Peggy, if you would just skip the next slide about body language, that was, if we had time, we could talk about that and come to at the feet of the master. Yes, that's it. If you think evil in another, you are doing at the same time 3 wicked things. You are filling your neighborhood with evil thought instead of good thought. If there is in that man the evil which you think, you are strengthening it and feeding it. And you fill your own mind with evil thoughts instead of good. And this is really basically the feet of the master on gossip. So gossip would be maybe the opposite of active listening, that you're just there to talk bad about somebody else. And it's just a reminder that conversation is a gift. It's something that humans have in a different way than animals and plants, not that they don't communicate, but that it really is a gift, and it is something that we can use for good or for harm. And
Can
then
I
the last
can I
slide,
make I'm
please.
sorry, but can I interject with a little issue on this about evil in others? We are right now in the nation. There are many events that are happening that are we can consider evil acts of people out of the blue. And then if you say this is gossip, I will say to expand even to that situation when if you're denying there's evil in the world, then you're living in a fantasy. So the fact that you don't want to talk about the evil because you will fit into the definition of gossip, I would say that it's in human nature to talk about what they see. So it's part of us. Maybe we should restrain doing it or be conscious when we're doing it. But the reality is if you are in a situation that you see evil, you cannot say, oh, this is not happening. Oh, I'm not going to see that man doing rape or doing whatever, or he's not going to do that to me or whatever. So this is just more than just those words. It has some, depending on the situation, it has a value or it has a constraint. So I won't say this is set in stone. You have to look harder than just what it says here. That's just my opinion.
And if you see something happening, it's not saying don't intervene. It's just kind of dwelling or to think of evil in another, from the feet of the master. So yes, I understand what you're saying. And we have one more slide, and we're a couple minutes over, but not too much. And I just think this is a beautiful idea that an enemy is a person whose story has not yet been heard. That when we are willing to listen even to someone that we think is an enemy and to understand him or her, that there is the possibility of true communication.
Very nice.
You know, Carol, I think that the last two slides you've used really go to the heart of non-judgment. There's such a division right now in the country, and it just seems that, the first thing that happens is we shut another person out because their opinion is different than ours, and we've stopped actively listening to each other on both sides. It doesn't matter, it just seems like that communication, this is such a beautiful topic because there is this lack of communication going on in our country right now. And we're all experiencing it in one way or another. It doesn't matter what side you're on. There's family members who are on different political parties, and they're not speaking to each other because they can't hear each other, because they don't want to listen to each other, But if we started listening to each other, perhaps we would find that there's more commonality than difference.
Yeah.
But we're not, So these last two slides are just so profound.
It really, we talked about it being a discipline. We're hardwired to take care of our tribe, because if we don't have the tribe, we don't survive. So we stick to our tribe, and the other people are enemies, and it's very easy to be in that mode. And as people who are trying to walk the path, this is one way that we can be of service to ourselves, to our families, to the world. Sorry, someone else was going to.
I think it's a difficult time because it's so easy to get polarized in our thinking and overreactive to what we think is the opposite from where we're coming. And it is hard to keep and not get hijacked emotionally and overreactive, but we can't deny certain things that we have concerns about. So it is hard time to find that balance point where you don't get overly hijacked, but you do have to speak your truth, but then move towards finding something where you can align with somebody, because you don't want to write the person off totally. They do have qualities that you can still align with and work with. And that's the challenge, to find the human qualities you can still align with that person.
Yeah.
Very well said.
I wasn't going to be here this evening, and I think I emailed a number of you and said that I wasn't going to be here this evening because I was at a retreat with Cynthia Bajolt, who is a modern day mystic under the Christian philosophy. And one of the things she talked about is that Father Thomas, she was very good friends with Father Thomas Keating, and one of the things that Father Thomas used to talk about is asking the question, who am I? And Cynthia said this evening, which I thought was so profound, she said, we need to move from asking who am I to who are we? And moving into that whole thing about who are we, and stop thinking about this individual I, and it's all about me and blah, 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 but moving outside of that to this recognition that if I don't have all of you, I don't exist. It has to be this whole thing about us. It has to be we. So
I really like that, a perspective, moving from the I to the we and us. I think it has to happen. That's what I think the challenge is. That's why I think we're having this time, is to really get that down. And that's not easy to get it down, but we have to do it.
And it really got my mind going about, wow, well, we could do another webinar or something like that on that kind of topic, because it is so profound and it's so much to unpack.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, good. So we're having previews. What's to come? The other preview we have is next month on the first Sunday. Peggy will be leading us. And what are we going to be talking about next time, Peggy?
Primarily compassion, but I also want to bring in first empathy, then compassion, and then altruism.
Great. All right. Well, we hope we'll see everyone again. We ran a few minutes over, but certainly everything lovely. Thank everyone for being here. And
Thank you.
we hope that we'll see you next
Thank you,
month.
Karen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everyone.
Thank you, Carol.
Bye-bye.
Good
Thank
seeing
you.
you all.
Good
You
seeing
too.
all.
Thanks
Bye,
for
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.